Hi, humans. This is the first of at least two slideshows on Zhang Zihe or Zhang Songzheng, which this one is going to be about his cases on emotions. Very creative, very interesting. And then future ones will probably be on other topics. He has a lot of case studies. So, um, yeah, there. So just a little background for him. Yeah, Chinese men had so many different names. And so these are his two most common names. But in his cases, he refers to himself as Dairen. Um, so whenever in this slideshow we see Dairen, it's Zhang referring to himself, or maybe he didn't write the whole book. Maybe, his students wrote in some of it. In any case, Dairen refers to Zhang Zihe. He wrote a pretty famous book called Rumen Shiqin, which is translated something like Confucian duties to one's parents. And so that was published in 1288, the Jin dynasty. He's one of the four great masters of the Jin Yuan period, but he's the least popular of them all. The three others still have people who really follow them today, and he's much less followed. You'll see why in the other set of cases that are more herbal in nature. These aren't all herbal. Some of these are like behavioral therapy or something like that. Anyway, he is attributed with starting a school of thought that's called something like the attacking and descending school. Descending really means inducing a bowel movement. Attacking means some kind of herbs to make stuff leave the body. So herbs to make you vomit, herbs to make you sweat, herbs to make you poop. And so his school, the attacking school, is the least popular because people don't like vomiting, sweating, and having diarrhea and stuff like that as a therapeutic method. But, sometimes it's necessary, sometimes it works. Anyway, he has a lot of really interesting cases on emotions. And so let's look at, I think I have maybe five, something like that. So a government official, it says his title up, but some government titles are hard to translate. Anyway, a government official somewhere heard that his father was murdered by a thief. How horrible. And so, of course, he had intense sorrow and cried and cried and cried. And eventually, when he stopped crying, he felt pain in his heart region, in his heart. And every day, the pain got worse and worse. After more than a month, he had developed a lump that was shaped like an overturned cup in this region, the epigastric region, the region below the heart. This overturned cup is a very specific thing in Chinese medicine, but we don't really need to talk about this type of accumulation. It was discussed in Nanjing and other books. Anyway, so the pain was strong and unbearable from this lump. He tried all kinds of medicines, but nothing worked. Someone suggested using fire needles, which means, making the needle red hot and then pricking with it, and also moxa. But the patient just didn't like the idea at all. He wasn't interested in that. And so Dairen Zhang Zihe was famous, and so he sent for this famous doctor. So Dairen arrived, and he brought with him a shaman, a wu, which are people who channel the spirits and do incantations and ritual and stuff like that. And so the shaman is doing his thing, making hand gestures and chanting incantations and so forth. And while he's doing that, Dairen mimicked him, but randomly mixing in comic words to tease him until the patient laughed so hard he couldn't stand it and turned his face away. He's supposed to be in mourning. He's not supposed to be laughing. So he turned away to face the wall. So I'm sure as a child, you either mimicked someone or someone mimicked you. It's really kind of irritating. I don't know what the shaman thought about this. Maybe he cursed Dairen after that, but it's a pretty comical image of Dairen mumbling and gesturing nonsense words and so forth. So the poor guy whose father was murdered, then after a day or two, the lump below his heart completely dissolved. Dairen said, Neijing says that worry binds qi. So he's worrying about his father, and qi gets bound up, and that ends up making a lump. And joy relaxes and harmonizes the 100 vessels. You know, joy is the emotion of the heart, and Su Wen chapter 39 says that it relaxes or slows down or moderates qi. So it also, Nijing says that joy overcomes sorrow. By 5 elements, joy is fire and sorrow is metal. So fire melts metal. So Neijing has this method of treatment. He's claiming that even though he's not using herbs, he's using a treatment that was, described in Neijing. I mean, it wasn't described exactly like this, but this joy overcomes sorrow is what he was trying to do by making the patient laugh and be happy. Laughter is the sound of the heart, and that's going to overcome metal and sorrow. So that's the first of his cases that we're talking about today. Um, so the second case is somebody who's angry and not eating. The wife of somebody, whoever, doesn't matter who, somebody named Xiang, who had some position, was sick from anger. And she also didn't want to eat. We could understand that. Of course, liver, wood, anger, liver controls earth, spleen, food, digestion. Yeah. Okay. So she's not eating. That's part of the chief complaint. And she had the habit of shouting and cursing and wanted to kill anyone nearby. And she unceasingly used abusive language. Crowds of doctors had given her herbs for the last 6 months, but no change. She's still like that. So the husband called Dairen and said, Can you do something about my wife? And Dairen said, Zhang Zihe said, This is difficult to treat with herbs, but I have another way, not using herbs. All the previous doctors tried to use herbs, but they didn't work. He's going to try this kind of behavioral therapy or whatever you want to call it. So he sent in 2 entertaining women. This could be translated a number of different ways. Its main meaning in, maybe prostitute, but that has such a ugly connotation. So these may be performers. This word is meant different things at different times. So anyway, 2 entertaining women. They both applied cinnabar powder, you've probably seen Chinese opera performers and how their face is all painted. So they were all powdered up like actors, and they performed like actors and made the wife laugh. So remember, she was really angry, and now she's laughing. Anger is wood element, and laughter is heart, is fire. So fire drains wood. Okay. The next day, he made these women wrestle with each other, and she laughed and laughed again. Then he had, I don't know if it's the same 2 women or other 2 women, but somebody who could really eat a lot, sit, maybe one on each side of the wife and eat and eat and eat and exaggerate how wonderful the food was. So then the wife said, Give me some of that. She demanded to taste the food. And so remember, she wasn't eating. Now she's eating. After a few days, her anger decreased, her eating increased, and she recovered without herbs. Later, she had a son, which is, the urgent thing back then. Um, uh, so he goes on to say, a doctor is valued for his talent. If he doesn't have talent, how can he adapt to infinite variation? He's saying you have to have creative thinking sometimes. Well, I don't know if we could do this kind of stuff today, but there's certainly interesting cases using one emotion to drain another or one emotion to overcome another, and fire, the laughter, feeds earth. She wasn't eating the spleen. So he's taking away from wood with fire and adding to earth with that same fire. Okay. I have a hard time believing that she will stay sane for the rest of her life. But anyway, okay, here's another one, a case of insomnia. The wife in a wealthy family had a lot of injury from thought and contemplation. So, she's just thinking too much. I don't know what she's thinking about, but she's just using too much thought, which is earth. She had insomnia for 2 years. So he says this could be cured without medicine. We're going to use behavioral therapy. The husband had sent for Dairen to treat her. Dairen said, the pulse on both arms is moderate. Huan Mai is the pulse of the spleen, actually. And the spleen has received the problem. This is the reason, the reason for this is because spleen governs thought. So he's saying the pulse matches spleen, matches thought. Okay, so now he knows it's earth. Then he conspired with her husband to incite severe anger in her. Of course, anger is wood, and wood is going to break open the earth that's stuck. So Dairen, he used up a lot of their resources. He took some of their riches, whatever, and he ate and drank their food for several days. He's staying with them, being a horrible guest, eating up everything and using up everything. And he didn't even write a formula, and then he left. The wife was enraged at his behavior. She thought that they had been really taken advantage of. She got so mad and she started sweating. That night she was tired and slept. Remember, this is insomnia. She was like this and didn't awaken for 8 or 9 days. I find that hard to believe, but she slept a lot for the next week or two. And from that time on, she started eating again and her pulse became normal. Okay, nice work if you can get it, right? Okay, here's a longer case. And I know some of you, if you've been listening to some of my other videos, or if you've been in some place where I've been posting cases, you've seen this case maybe, or some of these other cases, but they're still fun, they're still interesting. By the way, this unfortunately is AI art, but oh well. So the wife of another person was somehow, she was traveling and she was upstairs in an inn overnight. But that night, robbers set the place on fire. Yeah, I guess everybody would run out and then the robbers could steal their stuff. So in a fright, she fell off the bed. And from that time on, whenever she heard a sound, she would collapse from fright and lose consciousness. So now she's back home and her family has to tiptoe around, trying not to make a sound. And a year has passed and they're still tiptoeing around, trying to be as quiet as possible, but she's still like that. Various doctors had treated this as a heart shen disease and used herbs like ginseng, janju, which is, pearl, um, and a formula called Dingzhi Wan, to settle the will, which, fright affects various organs, including the kidneys, and the will is the spirit of the kidneys. But none of that worked. So Dairen saw her and, decided, diagnosed her and said, fright is yang. It enters from the exterior. Fear is yin. It issues from the interior. That's interesting. So, the fright came from the exterior because these robbers and fire scared her so much. That came from the outside. But fear is like your own emotion that's coming from, what you're worrying about. So that's a nice distinction. Fright comes from the unknown. Fear comes from the known. Like, if we know something is bad, we might be afraid of it. But if we don't know what's going on, we become frightened instead. Very interesting. He says the foot Chaoyang gallbladder channel belongs to liver and wood. Gallbladder is courage. Fright damages the gallbladder. It's true. Gallbladder is associated with courage, will, well, determination, and so forth. And so, if the gallbladder is deficient, if the gallbladder is injured, then that person is easily startled or easily frightened. So Dairen ordered two maidservants to hold her, hold the woman's arms and place her on a tall chair. So she's in a high place being held up by two servants. Then he set a low table right in front of her. So she's up above and the table is down below. And Dairen says, Madam, you should watch this. And then he struck the table repeatedly with a piece of wood. It really frightened her because she was so startled about everything. Dairen said, I struck the table with a piece of wood. Why are you frightened? It's just a piece of wood. It's just a table. So he waited until she settled down and then he struck it again. And her fright was not quite as much because, he talked about the known is fear and not fright. After a few moments, he struck the table three or five more times. Next, he struck the door with a stick. Then he secretly dispatched someone to draw a window behind him. This part's a little weird, but so he's beating things, making noise, and she's getting more and more used to it. Gradually, her fright settled. She smiled and said, why are you doing this? And Dairen said, Neijing says, for someone who is frightened, familiarize them with it. So there's this word ping. Here's the sentence: a frightened person, ping it. Okay. And so normally we wouldn't translate this, this could mean level it or calm it or something like that. But we're going to see that he's using this to mean familiar, which is one of its meanings. If you look it up in a big dictionary, one of its meanings is kind of like something that's just normal, level, average, something that's familiar. So he's using the meaning of pingchang, which means ordinary. So for someone who's frightened, familiarize them with it, make that thing ordinary. So he says, familiar means ordinary, this pingchang, when there's no fright when something is ordinary, when something ordinary appears. So he's playing with the Chinese words in a way that is hard to translate into English without all this explanation. So, as I said, mostly people will translate this in a different way, but from the context, he's talking about, when somebody's frightened with something, you've got to familiarize them, desensitize them to it. That night, he made people beat on the door and I guess the window that was drawn in the wall from dusk until dawn. That's not a good night's sleep. So he says, fright is the Shen leaping up. He made her look down by beating on the low table. So the Shen is leaping up, but he's making her draw her attention downward to pull the Shen back down. As a result, the Shen gathered back inward. And after a day or two, she was not frightened, even if she heard thunder. And this word thunder is significant because a very famous quote is that the trigram that's called Jun um, means is it corresponds to thunder. And there's this famous sentence that thunder startles for 100 li. Well, this word startle is the same word as fright. You can translate this word fright also as startle. This one word in Chinese could be translated either way. And so, since I Ching says that thunder is very frightening or startling, then after a day or two, she's not frightened, even if she heard this most startling thing. So her husband had in the past had not been fond of Dai Ren. He didn't like him. I think that Dai Ren is kind of the guy who will play tricks on you. Doesn't it seem like he's a trickster and that he'll do wild things, and also that he's like very confident in himself? So I can imagine some people might not like him. Also, maybe his medicine, because remember, he's really into attacking medicine to make people vomit or sweat or poop. But in the past, her husband hadn't liked him. But from this time on, after he got the wife back to, her calm self, from this time on until the end of his days, he was totally convinced that Dai Ren was a genius. And if anyone said Dai Ren didn't know medicine, this husband chased them off with a dagger. Wow. So that's that case. I think these are really amusing. I hope you do too. Okay, this is the last case in this little video. Okay, and again, it's from Dairen. It's from Zhang Zihe. So this one's about fear and pain in the ribside region. Some of you might call it the hypochondriac region, the regions on the sides of the chest. So somebody named Sun from Luoyang, an ancient capital of China, was falsely accused in a lawsuit, and they even grabbed his wife and took her into custody, although somehow he escaped. He must have been out when they came to get him. So he fled to an old friend's house. Hide me, please, I'm in trouble. That night, he felt pain in his stomach and rib sides. I can imagine, with all that stress and anxiety. So he pleaded with his old friend to get him medicine. And the old friend said, "Oh, there's a famous doctor named Zhang Dairen nearby. Let's go. I'll go with you." At that time, Dairen was suffering from a hangover, and he shouted loudly at them, "Go away, go away." But the friend of this fugitive said, "Hey, I'm with a close relative who's sick. We really hope you'll diagnose him." So Dairen looked out the window and saw Sun, the guy who's a fugitive, and said, "This guy is hiding out in a great panic." I mean, he just looks out the window and can tell that that's the problem. The old friend said, "How do you know?" And Dairen said, "His face is green, but stripped of color, like I guess a really pale green. So his gallbladder has suffered terror." Later, Sun was pardoned and, left hiding. And only after that did they tell Dairen that he had been a fugitive. So those are my cases for today, and I'll have ones that involve more medicine and other stuff from this same doctor another time.